Welcome back to Klinga Games. Today we are continuing our Series 10 VGC teams. This week, as you can see from the Pokemon behind me, we are doing our first of the Gen 3 Pokemon, particularly my favorite of the Weather Trio, Rayquaza. Rayquaza is, how to say this, terrible. He's not terrible, but he's got great stats in both attack and special attack. But the rest of his stats are pretty average, below average for a restricted Pokemon. So it does a lot of damage, not as much damage as the top restricteds. It doesn't have its own weather like Kyogre, and its attack stat is not nearly as high as Zacian's with Intrepid Sword. So it's got good attacking stats, but its damage output is not the best. But I went ahead and built a team that's kind of built around it being able to hit on both sides. And I gave it some moves that are kind of niche and very conditional, we'll say. But the team I built around it is pretty fun. Even though Rayquaza isn't that much of a meta staple, I only have really 2 meta staples on the team with it. So I think it's a pretty interesting team. We'll go ahead and hop into the battles now so you can see what I'm talking about. Alright. So getting into game number 1 here, my opponent has an Incineroar, a Rillaboom, a Calyrex Ice, a Rangaroo, Mimikyu, and Tapu Fini. So it's very clearly a Trick Room team, which the Amoonguss is generally our answer for Trick Room, but they're also packing the Tapu Fini, which could give us a lot of issues, as well as this team does not really handle. Outside of Trick Room, it handles Calyrex Ice pretty well, but if Calyrex Ice can get the first move off, we do not have a whole lot of great switch-ins for it. Obviously, Amoonguss, Landorus, Articuno, and Rayquaza are all weak to Ice. So that's a bit of a Achilles heel on this team, but Incineroar does really well into Calyrex Ice generally, and Amoonguss is usually fantastic into it when they don't have Tapu Fini with it. So what we went ahead and led here was Pheromosa, Amoonguss, Incineroar, and Rayquaza. Pheromosa is general speed control, and it hits super hard. Amoonguss obviously is our best option against Trick Room. Incineroar is the obvious Intimidate switch, and I don't think I really need to explain Incineroar. Everyone's seen it. And Rayquaza, just to try and get the restricted on the field. So we go ahead and get the battle started against Tross, or Cross. I don't know how to pronounce it. I may go ahead and call it Tross, just because that's the way it's spelled. So they go ahead and lead Incineroar and Rangaroo, which is the shiny. Actually, I kind of like the Rangaroo shiny. Incineroar shiny looks so much better than its normal one, but I hate its normal one, so that's not much of a step up. So what we do here is we go ahead and close combat into Incineroar, and we Spore into the Rangaroo slot. So they go ahead and fake out into Amoonguss, and we go ahead and get the close combat here into Incineroar, which takes it down to about 75%. Without the Intimidate, that's a KO. But obviously, we're both leading, so they get the Intimidate off, and then they also get the Trick Room off, which is a little bit unfortunate. So, Ferramosa is obviously in a horrible position here. There's not a whole lot I can do. So I toyed with the idea of attacking and just hoping that they won't target into it twice because of the Focus Sash. But I eventually decide to switch it out into my own Incineroar and then Spore into the Rangaroo slot. So we switched in Incineroar, the Galarian champion. This is the same Incineroar I used on my Dialga team. I only have one shiny, obviously, so odds are I'm going to keep using the same one over and over. So we do get the Intimidate onto their Incineroar, not their Rangaroo. And they do protect their Rangaroo, so we Spore into it and they protect. So that's 2 times we tried to Spore, 2 fails, so not great. And then they do Flare Blitz into Amoonguss. Because of the Intimidate, we do live that. So what I do here is I go ahead and fake out into Incineroar and try once again to Spore into Oranguru. And they take very, very long with their turns, which I probably should have done here. I have a bad habit of picking the first move that comes to my head a lot of times, not thinking it through. So I need to get better about that. The fact that I'm waiting all this time is probably not a great sign. So they switch out their Incineroar and switch in their Tapu Fini, which unfortunately puts the Misty Train up on the field, and which means our Spore does not do anything again. So we are 0 for 3 on Spores. So we toy with the idea of switching out here. There's not a whole lot of great switch-ins that we have for Tapu Fini. So what I end up doing here is I end up Darkest Layering it into the Oranguru slot, and I go ahead and risk it and switch Amoonguss out into Rayquaza. This is basically just to get the Regenerator onto Amoonguss. With Intimidate up, or not with Intimidate, with Trick Room up, Rayquaza is not going to be doing a whole lot. Luckily, they instruct into the Tapu Fini, which hasn't done anything yet, so we do get lucky there, and they don't do anything. But they do Muddy Water with the Tapu Fini. Luckily, we do get the miss with Incineroar. I always forget how accurate Muddy Water is. I think it's like 85% accurate, so it's not too lucky to dodge that. And then what I do here is I play with it a little bit, but I decide to go ahead and Parting Shot into the Tapu Fini and protect the Rayquaza. So Rayquaza does get the Protect off here. And they do Instruct with the Tapu Fini, so that's not great, because that means they get to repeat their Muddy Water here, which does a pretty good chunk here to Incineroar, but not nearly as much as I was thinking it would do. So really what I should have done there is Darkest Lariat again into the Oranguru. In this game in general, I didn't really view Oranguru as much of a threat as I should have, so bit of a missed opportunity there. And then we get the Pheromosa on the field, and Rayquaza is protected here from the Moonblast. So we're in a pretty good position here, and then Trick Room ends. So what I do here is I go ahead and Poison Jab into the Tapu Fini with Pheromosa, and I Crunch into the Oranguru with Rayquaza. So they go ahead, probably predicting a Dark move for off of one of these two, switch it out into the Incineroar, which is another big plus for them because both of these Pokemon are mostly physical attackers. These two are pretty good mixed attackers, but on the team they're generally physical. Going back to the Incineroar survival, this Incineroar is mostly HP and special defense, so I really should have thought about it a little bit more and went ahead and just attacked with it and just knew I was going to live a Muddy Water. So that was a bit of missed opportunity there. If you do rent this team, Incineroar is a defensive, specialty defensive build. So they go ahead and they bring out their Calyrex here. So I go ahead and Poison Jab into the Tapu Fini, and I Overheat into the Calyrex. So we do get the Poison Jab off here into Tapu Fini, which does decent damage, but not a whole lot, and then we miss the Overheat in the Calyrex, which that is just really bad. So they get a Moonblast off here into Ferramosa, get it down to the Focus Sash, and then they Glacial Lance here with Calyrex, which takes out both my Pokemon. Obviously the overheat miss, you can't really plan around that. We needed damage, but what I should have done there is I should have doubled into the Calyrex. Calyrex is obviously the bigger threat. We already parting shotted into the Tapu Fini, so it's not doing as much damage. So I really should have played that a little bit smarter, targeted into the Calyrex with both. So I go ahead and bring out my Incineroar and my Amoonguss here. Get the Intimidate down. Obviously doesn't help much against Tapu Fini, but we do get the Intimidate down onto Calyrex, which is good. And I go ahead and Fake Out into Calyrex and Spore into Calyrex. This is kind of a panic move just because Calyrex, even with the Intimidate, is at +1. And if it has the opportunity to become a real problem for us. Unfortunately, they do have Protect on their Calyrex, so we waste our turn here, which is a crucial turn, so that's really, really bad. So what I do here is I go ahead and Flare Blitz into the Calyrex, and I protect Amoonguss. They are pretty smart here. They switch out. I don't want to sound like that. It's like derogatory. They played really smart here in general. Like they had played a really good game, not just right here. But they switch a Calyrex out into the Tapu Fini, so they get the Misty Terrain back on the field, and they resist this Flare Blitz, which I'm sure they saw coming. Again, this is kind of a bad move by me. It's not ridiculous, but I really should have targeted into the Oranguru, even with because I was protecting Amoonguss here, so I should have taken care of the Trick Room while I had the option. Incineroar would have lived a Glacial Lance, but it puts us in a really bad position where they're able to get a second Trick Room up onto us. So they again instruct without a previous move being on the field. So that's just really interesting that they, I guess, didn't know you instruct to use as the last move used. So we get pretty decent damage in the Tapu Fini, all things considered. And then we do tank another Muddy Water with both our Pokemon here. So what I do here is I go ahead and I Darkest... Hold on. No, I was thinking about Darkest Layering it. My bad. So I thought about this one a little bit more. I go ahead and I expect them to switch out the Tapu Fini. And I don't want to get hit with... I don't want them to get Instruct off. So what I do here is I Rage Powder with Amoonguss, which I believe pulls Instruct. I think Instruct can target the opponent as well, so I think Rage Powder and Follow Me pulls it to you. I'm not totally certain about that, but they went ahead and Foul Played. So we do get the knockout on the Tapu Fini with the Flare Blitz because they don't Instruct. But we are at very, very low health. Misty Terrain is on the field, and they have Calyrex in the back. So pretty good to make it just a 2-0 win for them, but we are going to lose 2-0. Just how the game goes. Really, what I should have done, I shouldn't have been as obsessed with getting Spores off those first couple turns. They obviously had ways to play around it, and I should have focused more on getting damage onto Oranguru. If I was able to prevent the second Trick Room from going up, we probably win. I'm not going to say we definitely do, but there's a better chance that we win, considering we were able to knock out the Tapu Fini with Amoonguss and Incineroar, and Calyrex wouldn't really be too much of a threat to Pheromosa, Rayquaza, or Incineroar without Trick Room. So, lessons learned, target Oranguru, it's a much bigger threat than it seems like, and do not let them get a second Trick Room up. So, good game, Troz, and we will go ahead and hop into game number 2. Alright, getting into game number 2 against Tony D. Fury, which is a great One Piece reference that I love. I think it's a One Piece reference. I don't think there's anyone named Tony Fury in One Piece, but the D. Anyway, enough nerding out on that. So my opponent has a Rayquaza team of their own with Incineroar, Volcarona, Rayquaza, Whimsicott, Moltres, Galarian, and Regieleki. So what I go ahead and do here is I lead my Pheromosa and Incineroar with my Rayquaza and Landorus in the back. I did not expect to run into another Rayquaza team, so this was really, really cool. I think this is the only Rayquaza team I've ran into in any of my attempts with with my teams. So just fun how everything works out sometimes. But it's also interesting that the only Pokemon that we have in common is the Incineroar. So just goes to show you how diverse you can make Pokemon. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting running into another Rayquaza team. I thought for sure I'd be the only one. But it does look like his team is a little bit different. Obviously, Regieleki kind of fills the same role as Ferramosa, and Volcarona can do a lot of the same things Amoonguss can. And then, I don't know if any of the games I'm featuring shows it, but Articuno is mostly on the team as a Tailwinder. But usually Ferramosa Icy Wind is the better speed control, I'll be honest with you. So they go ahead and lead with their Rayquaza and Whimsicott into my Pheromosa and Incineroar combo. So we do get the Intimidate off, lower their Rayquaza's attack, which is important, and their Whimsicott's, which is not. So I go ahead and I Icy Wind into both Pokemon, and I fake out the Whimsicott. The idea here is just prevent the Tailwind and get some speed control. If they read into it, there's not a whole lot of damage. Pheromosa's got the Focus Sash, so it's only going to be taking one attack at the max here. So not a whole lot of downside to this move, but just good speed control in general. And we again face an opponent who takes a long time making their decisions, so interesting there. So they switch out their Whimsicott and bring in their shiny Regieleki, which is usually a key that it's hacked. But this means they don't have Tailwind, so we do get a decent little chip damage here on the Regieleki with the Fake Out. And even though we missed the Rayquaza this turn, we do get a nice Icy Wind here into the Regieleki, which does a pretty decent amount of damage and lowers its speed, which is very important that we got it on the switch, because Ferramosa is not as fast as Regieleki, but it is insanely fast. So Regieleki at -1 is slower than Ferramosa. So we can go ahead and get another Icy Wind off here, and we're going to go ahead and Flare Blitz into the Regieleki just to get that KO, get it off the board. This Incineroar, though, does not have any speed investment, and even if it did, I don't know if max speed Incineroar outspeeds -2 Regieleki. So even though we get its speed down, we're still going to move after it with the Incineroar. But we do find out that it's a berry Regieleki, which means it's probably very bulky, which is interesting. I think the only items I've ever really seen ran on Regieleki are the Focus Sash or the Magnet. So it's really cool to see a berry on it. I don't know how often that berry probably comes into play, because I feel like a lot of attacks targeted Regieleki will knock it out, but just cool. And then they Volt Switch into Ferramosa, get it down to its Sash, and we get a nice Flare Blitz off here into the Rayquaza. Does not get the burn, unfortunately, but does a decent amount of damage. So what we do here is we go ahead and protect with the Ferramosa, and we Parting Shot into the Rayquaza. And then they try to Extreme Speed into the Ferramosa, so it's a good thing we protected here. and then they do get the Tailwind up. There's not anything we could have done to prevent it this turn, and trying to Icy Wind again would have been greedy, and as you can see, it would have just gotten us knocked out. But we do successfully get a Parting Shot off into Rayquaza, which thanks to their Tailwind and Incineroar's speed is just a free switch in. So it's really a choice between Rayquaza and Landorus, which one's going to be the better option here. It was a pretty tough decision. As you can see, I went back and forth a couple times. I kind of flick between my options a lot when I'm thinking. If you ever see me do that in the videos, that's what I'm doing. But I do go ahead and pick Rayquaza to come in Incineroar's place, which does two things. Or the Parting Shot does two things. One, it gets Rayquaza in safely, and then it also allows us to go ahead and switch in Incineroar for free. So I go ahead and switch Pheromosa out into the Incineroar, and I go ahead and do an Overheat into Whimsicott. This Overheat on Rayquaza is mostly there for Zacian. It gives Rayquaza a way to be somewhat threatening to Zacian under Tailwind, or if Zacian's speed is lowered. But it's also obviously nice coverage for grass types, and especially if you don't want to drop your defenses with Dragon Descent. Dragon Descent is basically the nuke of this set and of this team. Sharp Beak Dragon Descent does tons of damage, so it's a really, really good attack, but you really have to pace it out so you don't get yourself knocked out with the defense drops. So we do get Incineroar back in. That gets Rayquaza down to -2, but this Rayquaza is a Swords Dance Rayquaza, which is cool. So they do get their attack back up to neutral here. And they Moonblast with the Whimsicott, but into the Incineroar slot. So Rayquaza lives to get this Overheat off and knock out Whimsicott. So again, they take a pretty long time here figuring out what they want to bring in Whimsicott's place. I think we did a pretty good job here of stalling out their Tailwind, which should be running out here in the next couple turns. So they go ahead and bring in Galarian Moltres, which I'm sure the reason it's on this team is to counter Calyrex. Moltres is phenomenal into Calyrex if you ever need a really solid counter into it. So we go ahead and fake out and Dragon Ascent into the Rayquaza, which I guess was just a bit too obvious because they protect here. So we waste both of our moves here. Luckily, their Moltres does not seem to be spec'd very much into special attack. It looks like it's mostly going to rely on getting boosts. So their Fiery Wrath does not do very much damage to either of my Pokemon. But we are at a disadvantage here because they still have, I believe they still have their Tailwind up. So our Rayquaza will be moving second, and we're both at neutral. So I was hoping to get their attack lowered and kind of get into a situation where we live one of their attacks and take them out. But they did get back up to neutral. So what we do here is we Parting Shot into the Moltres slot, and we Dragon Ascent into Rayquaza. They do switch out the Moltres into Regieleki, but it's not really too bad to get a Parting Shot off into Regieleki because it can do a lot of damage here. Unfortunately, they do go first, and they do get the Dragon Ascent into our Rayquaza, knocking us out. So they lose some of their HP because of their Life Orb, and we do get their defenses lowered. So it's not a complete loss, but it's also not great. So we go ahead and Parting Shot into the Landorus here, and then their Tailwind finally fizzles out. I don't know what to say. Their Tailwind ends. So then we get Incineroar back onto the field, which does give us a chance to lower their Rayquaza's attack. So they are now at -1 at everything except speed, which is pretty interesting. So yeah, you see there, everything except speed is dropped on it. So what we do here is we go ahead and Sludge Bomb into the Regieleki slot, and we fake out into Rayquaza. The Sludge Bomb into Regieleki is because they have we know they have Moltres G in the back, so we do not want to get caught where they can. We don't want to get into a situation where they switch in Moltres and we lose another turn with no damage. So Sludge Bomb should be enough to take out Regieleki regardless, but just in case they switch out into Moltres, or, you know, Volt Switch, then we would be able to do damage. So we were correct here, they do switch out. They get some damage off in the process, but we get a nice Sludge Bomb off here, which does about a third, I would say. So it was good that we didn't waste that damage. So what we do here is we go ahead and Sludge Bomb into Rayquaza, and we Flare Blitz into Moltres. With the defenses dropped and it at half health, Rayquaza's an easy KO here, and we know that the Moltres is not very threatening against my Pokemon. As you can see there, it only does about a third into Landorus, and it really doesn't do anything into Incineroar. So, and we outspeed it, so we're pretty free here to just target up and get some damage off. They couldn't really do anything. If they protected the Rayquaza, then we get some free damage into Moltres. If they switch out into Regieleki, we get the KO. I guess their best move there would have been to protect, but even then, they're not really doing any major damage into Incineroar. And Landorus could take another 2 Fiery Wraths probably, or another Fiery Wrath crit, so not a whole lot they could have done here. So they bring in Regieleki, get the Thunderbolt into Incineroar, but we outspeed Moltres and get the Sludge Bomb off onto it. So now it is just Regieleki, Pheromosa, and Landorus on the field. So it's important we have Ferramosa here, because if the Regieleki is packing Explosion, or I don't know if Explosion, I'm not sure if they'd win if they did Explosion, but if they had Extreme Speed, they could still damage Landorus. So we do find out they're not. They only have Electric type moves. They knock out the Ferramosa here, but Earth Power is an easy KO into Regieleki, and that goes ahead and gets us the victory. Really, the only major mistake here was the double target into Rayquaza when it was an obvious protect. But really good game, Tony D Fury, and we'll go ahead and get into game number 3. All right, so getting into game number 3, my opponent is Gray, and they have a Necrozma Duskmane team, which is pretty cool. So they have Porygon 2, Necrozma Duskmane, Tapu Fini, Rillaboom, Zapdos, and Incineroar. So, typical Incineroar, but other than that, pretty cool team. Obviously, Rillaboom Incineroar is a really good combo, and Tapu Fini fills out that kind of water, grass, fire core. But the Necrozma Duskmane is a pretty cool Pokemon, and I do always love to see Zapdos, the original Zapdos. It was always my favorite of the birds. But it's an obvious Trick Room team here. So what I go ahead and do here is I lead Incineroar and Ferramosa, because their obviously Trick Room setters are the Necrozma and Porygon, which Ferramosa threatens a lot of damage into both of those. So I go ahead and lead Incineroar Ferramosa for the Fake Out, Intimidate, and damage, and then I keep Landorus and Rayquaza in the back. Ideally, with this team, they don't have redirection, so ideally, the plan is to keep Trick Room off the board. If we can figure out who's going to be Trick Rooming and knock them out, then we have a pretty good advantage going into this game. The teams that the Trick Room teams that this team kind of struggles against are typically the hard Trick Room teams with Calyrex Ice, because of Rayquaza's poor matchup into Calyrex Ice, and just those kind of teams insistence on getting up Trick Room, I'd say. Just they have a lot of ways to counteract the normal ways to stop Trick Room. So those are the teams that this team usually struggles against. But teams like this, where you got Porygon 2 as the setter and you've got no real redirection, the team's pretty good against. So what I do here, they lead Tapu Fini and Incineroar, which is pretty interesting. So what I do here is I go ahead and fake out the Tapu Fini, and I switch in Landorus in Pheromosa's spot. Ferramosa with the Intimidate is not going to be doing enough damage to really threaten, and my opponent kind of knows that. But then Incineroar doesn't really have the ability to threaten our Landorus at all, so Landorus is a pretty safe switch there. So I was expecting us to trade Fake Outs, but their Incineroar actually has Protect, which is pretty cool. Then we get the Fake Out into Tapu Fini, which immediately heals it up with its leftovers. So whole lot of nothing that turn. So what I do here is I go ahead and Parting Shot Tapu Fini with the Incineroar, and I Earth Power into their Incineroar with my Landorus. So they actually bring in their Porygon here, which is pretty good for us considering we already have our Parting Shot ready to go. And then they Muddy Water here, which luckily our Landorus avoids, and Incineroar doesn't take a whole lot of damage here. Like from game 1, this Incineroar is really specially defensively built, so unless it's a really powerful water type like Kyogre or Palkia, Incineroar should be able to live most water type moves. So we go ahead and we Parting Shot out here into Pheromosa, which gives us a chance to just close combat into Porygon and Sludge Bomb into Porygon. The reason that this is the safest play is because if they don't switch out, then we get the KO with close combat and Sludge Bomb gets directed into Tapu Fini. If they do switch out like they're doing right here into Incineroar, close combat will miss this KO, so that's why the double up with Sludge Bomb was so important. Most Porygon 2s do not carry Protect, so that's why I felt so comfortable making this double up. And as you can see, after the Intimidate, we do miss the KO onto Porygon 2, but the Sludge Bomb from Landorus targeted into Porygon 2 as well allows us to get that KO and not risk them getting Trick Room up. So that double up was pretty safe. There's not a whole lot Tapu Fini could have done there. It could have Muddy Watered, and that would have been annoying for the later, but it wouldn't have stopped us from getting a KO onto the Porygon 2, and if Tapu Fini stayed in, we get the KO, we get the Sludge Bomb off into Tapu Fini. So what we do here is we go ahead and we... Hold on. Getting ahead of myself. So we go ahead and we switch out the Ferramosa into Incineroar, and we go ahead and Earth Power into Necrozma with Landorus. Ferramosa is pretty frail, so I was expecting a Flare Blitz from Incineroar into it, or a Flare Blitz into Landorus. But what they do here is they go ahead and Fake Out into Landorus, and they try to Psychic Fangs into the Ferramosa. But because we switched out into Incineroar, Incineroar is Dark type, so Psychic Fangs do not affect it, and we get a free switch in there. So what we do here is we Parting Shot into Necrozma, and we Earth Power into Necrozma with Landorus. They do switch out their Incineroar into Tapu Fini, and then they Protect their Necrozma. So we do waste another turn here, doubling up into a Protect. So we go ahead and waste an Earth Power, and we waste a nice Parting Shot here. But that's okay. What we can do now is we can go ahead and Parting Shot into the Tapu Fini and protect the Landorus. This should allow us to survive any attack that the Tapu Fini gives out next turn after the Protect. And then they go ahead and switch out their Necrozma here, which gives us a very good opportunity to cycle our Intimidate back in whenever the Necrozma gets back on the field. That's one of the reasons why it can be tougher to run Duskmane than just Solgaleo, Solgaleo has the Full Metal Body ability, which prevents stat drops of any kind, but Necrozma switches that out for Prism Armor, which weakens super effective damage, but it allows its stats to be dropped. So you gotta figure out which one's more important to you. I guess this this player values the weaker special attack, or weaker super effective damage, and the slower speed because it's a Trick Room team. So we go ahead and we get our Parting Shot off into Tapu Fini, and we go ahead and bring in Rayquaza here. So because Incineroar is the slowest thing on the field, we do get a pretty safe Parting Shot there. So what we do here is we go ahead and protect our Rayquaza, and I'm trying to figure out whether I want to Earth Power or Sludge Bomb. Earth Power into Incineroar or Sludge Bomb into the Tapu Fini. The Sludge Bomb is a little bit more risky because they have that Necrozma in the back, which is part Steel type and is immune to the Sludge Bomb. But we have a pretty good lead here, so I felt pretty comfortable taking the chance and Sludge Bombing into the Tapu Fini. Just like before, Incineroar doesn't really threaten Landorus at all, so even if they did switch out here, then we would still be in a pretty good position. So we do get the Sludge Bomb off, which does big damage to Tapu Fini, and they actually have Substitute on this Tapu Fini, which is pretty wild. I've never seen Substitute on Tapu Fini before. But because we did enough damage, they do not have the HP to set up the sub. So we're pretty comfortable here to Dragon Ascent and Earth Power into the Tapu Fini. But the battle is cancelled, so we win. So good game to Gray, and we will go ahead and get into game number 4. Alright, so into game number 4, and our opponent is running a Calyrex Ice, so we get a nice chance to get some redemption here against Cali Ice. They have Calyrex Ice, Gastrodon, Heatran, Raichu, Credilli, and Mimikyu. So this is a very cool team. A little bit more risky than the one we played before, with only Mimikyu as a Trick Room setter, and I guess Calyrex Ice can set it as well. But they have Credilli and Gastrodon, which are some pretty cool Trick Room Pokemon, and Heatran, which can be very annoying to deal with in general. So what we do here is we go ahead and lead Amoonguss and Incineroar with Landorus in the back, and then it's usually nice to bring Rayquaza, but I decided here that it's probably safer not to, and I go ahead and bring Ferramosa as well. The Landorus is pretty much required in case they bring Heatran, and it's very good against the Gastrodon as well. And then I do not want to have 2 4-time weaknesses to Ice with Calyrex Ice Rider, so I figured it's probably safer to go with the Pheromosa option. It gives probably just about as much damage output, not quite as much, but really good damage output regardless, and it does not have that 4 times weak to Ice, as well as holding a Focus Sash, so it gives me one other option to sort of preserve my Pokemon and outlast Trick Room. So they go ahead and lead Credilli and Mimikyu. So we get a nice Intimidate off here into Mimikyu and into Credilli. Probably not going to matter in Credilli, which is usually a special attacker, but Mimikyu actually is pretty good attack, so it's pretty safe to just, or it's pretty safe to get that Intimidate off onto it. So what we do here is we go ahead and Spore into the Mimikyu slot and Fake Out into Credilli. Mimikyu typically runs Mental Herb, and we have Mental Herb on our Amoonguss, so we don't really fear the taunt, and I feel pretty comfortable with sporing it here. So they do taunt us right away. We do get the Mental Herb proc, so we do get to get our Spore off here. So we put him to sleep. Unfortunately, this Mimikyu is Lumberry, so they're kind of reading that meta a little bit, and they actually worked around the typical weakness of Mental Herb. So now we do fear the taunt, and they are still awake. So what we do here is we go ahead and protect the Amoonguss, and we Parting Shot into the Credilli slot. So we do get lucky. They taunt into our Protect. So no harm, no foul there. And we get the Parting Shot into Credilli. So I haven't seen a whole lot of them, but Credilli generally runs Meteor Beam Power Herb. So I knew that Incineroar was not very safe on the field. Even though it looks like a pretty neutral matchup into Credilli, the Meteor Beam ability of Credilli makes it a very bad matchup into Incineroar. Or makes our Incineroar matchup into it very bad. So just like I expected, they do get the Meteor Beam here off, use up their Power Herb, and they do focus down into what was the Incineroar slot, what is now the Pheromosa slot. So, just like I was talking about in the preview, having that Focus Sash gives us a nice ability to pivot in. It's not really a defensive switch because we get down to 1 HP, but our ability to live that Meteor Beam is very, very valuable. So we go ahead and we Spore into Mimikyu, and we protect Ferramosa here. On this turn, we're kind of playing a mental game here of, are they going to keep taunting or are they going to set up Trick Room? So I go ahead and try and call their bluff here, expecting them to Trick Room here. So we do protect with Ferramosa. They protect with Credilli, but unfortunately they did not bluff. They went ahead and taunted again, and we can't use Spore now. So we're in a pretty tricky situation. I'll go ahead and I Grass Knot here, which is the only move we can do, into Mimikyu just to break that disguise for future reference. And I Close Combat into Credilli here. So off of Pheromosa's amazing attack stat, and with it being Stab and super effective, Close Combat does get the KO here into Credilli. Lowers our defense and special defense, but we are literally at 1 HP, so we don't really care about that at all. And then Amoonguss goes first, so we do know they are setting up Trick Room here, and we get the Grass Knot off into Mimikyu. We do get to break its disguise and lower its speeds very slightly, but now we're in a tricky situation where Amoonguss, who is normally fantastic in Trick Room, is now pretty much useless because we are taunted. So we have to play around. We have to play around the taunt here, which can be very tricky. And they bring in the Pokemon that we are most scared of, which is that Calyrex Ice Rider. So, pretty tricky spot here. What I go ahead and do here is I switch out Amoonguss into Incineroar. That gives me a chance to get the taunt off of it whenever it comes back in, as well as getting a second Intimidate on Mimikyu and an Intimidate onto Calyrex to get its attack to -1. So Amoonguss goes out, brings in the Incineroar. Normally you'd switch out Amoonguss to get Regenerator boosts, but we are already at full HP, so there's not a whole lot better we can do there. We do get the Intimidates down, which is always very nice. And then we get a nice Protect here with Ferramosa. And just like expected, they Glacial Lance here, which Ferramosa protects itself, and Incineroar does not take a whole lot of damage from here. With a resisted hit and it being intimidated, and Incineroar has a very, very good matchup into Calyrex. And we go ahead and we avoid that Play Rough by Mimikyu with the Protect. So here, we Parting Shot into Calyrex, and we try to get a double Protect here with Ferramosa. So Calyrex reads into our Parting Shot and protects itself, and Ferramosa does not get the double Protect. So unfortunately, it's just open here, and it goes down to a Play Rough. But that's not the worst thing that can happen. It does get knocked out by the Mimikyu and not the Calyrex. So we do get to bring in Amoonguss for free, and Calyrex does not get the Chilling Neigh boost. So that's a win in my book. So what we do here is we go ahead and read into the Glacial Lance here. I was toying with the Flare Blitz into Calyrex, but I decided to go ahead and Darkest Lariat instead. Flare Blitz is the stronger move, but I know it's not going to one-shot, and Flare Blitz has recoil, which is not great for Incineroar in the long run. We want to preserve its health as much as possible. So we go ahead and we Darkest Lariat into the Calyrex, and we protect Amoonguss here. Just to stall it out. There are 2 turns of Trick Room at this point, so protecting Amoonguss allows it to get a Spore off right before the end of Trick Room, which is very nice. So they go ahead and get another Glacial Lance off here into Incineroar, which you can see is a 4-hit KO by the looks of it, and they lose some more health thanks to the Life Orb. And then we get a Darkest Lariat off here, which does pretty good damage. That looks to be about probably a 3-hit KO, 2-hit KO with some more Life Orb recoil. And then as expected, they taunt into the Amoonguss, so we do get to avoid that with the Protect. So on this turn, we go ahead and we Darkest Lariat into Mimikyu. I'm not sure how much damage this would do, so this is really just to kind of get some damage onto it as their Trick Room setter. Again, I toyed with the Flare Blitz idea, but again, I really wanted to preserve Incineroar's HP as much as possible, so Darkest Lariat is the best move in this situation. And then we Spore into Calyrex, which Amoonguss is horribly slow, so there's nothing they can do in Trick Room to prevent this. So we do get Calyrex asleep, and because of the way sleep works, they have to spend at least 1 turn asleep, so they do not get to attack on the last turn of Trick Room. And then Incineroar gets a nice Darkest Lariat off here into the Mimikyu, which looks to be about a 2-hit KO after the disguise damage. So once again here, we Darkest Lariat into the Mimikyu, and we Grass Knot at the Mimikyu. So this was a mistake. I was playing too fast here. I wanted to Darkest Lariat into the Calyrex and Grass Knot into the Mimikyu, but I was clicking too fast here and kept my same move from before on Incineroar. Sorry, no, I went to Flare Blitz this time instead of Darkest Lariat, but I meant to Darkest Lariat into Calyrex, and I didn't. So this was a very, very risky play on accident. I wanted to target Calyrex and just didn't. Luckily, we did not get punished for it, and Calyrex stays asleep, and we get a Grass Knot here off into Calyrex. So that definitely puts it into Darkest Lariat range, and we will be able to outspeed it because we got that Mimikyu off the board. So now we do what I should have done last time, and we Darkest Lariat into the Calyrex, and we Grass Knot into the Gastrodon, which just came out. So at this point, we pretty much know we're going to win. We've got Landorus in the back that has Grass Knot as well, along with being Life Orb and having an amazing special attack. So at this point, it's just kind of playing it safe, making sure we don't make any big mistakes that would lose us the game. And Amoonguss actually has the ability to take out Gastrodon by itself if it just gets 2 Grass Knots off consecutively, as we can see there. And they will go ahead and eat their berry. So here I made a bit of a risky play. I went ahead and parting shotted into Gastrodon to bring Landorus onto the field, and I Grass Knot into Gastrodon with Amoonguss. So the risky thing here is that if they did Ice Beam into the Incineroar slot, if they read into it, then we might lose. I don't think we will, but it was still a risky play that I really shouldn't have done. Luckily they do not. They go ahead and recover, just expecting me to stick in with Landorus or Incineroar, and then they were hoping that putting the Amoonguss to sleep would limit my damage, and they could just recover off any damage that Incineroar gave. Luckily, the Gastrodon is slightly faster than Amoonguss, so they do not get to recover off that that Grass Knot damage, and then they're in range of the Landorus Grass Knot. So we go ahead and knock out Gastrodon, and we get the win here. And then, so good game, TK. But there's a very long exit sequence here, because, wait for it, my opponent disconnected. So good game, TK. And then we'll go ahead and get into the team breakdown. Alright, so here is the team that I used. With the rental code, I called this one Ray Ray. I didn't know what else to call it, so Rayquaza, Ray Ray, makes sense to me. So like I mentioned, Rayquaza is kind of average on most of its stats except its 2 attacking stats. So what I did here was I had it with a hasty nature, max attack, max speed with 4 points in HP, with Protect, Dragon Ascent, Crunch, and Overheat. Sharp Beak, Dragon Ascent on Rayquaza just destroys anything that it neutrally hits or super effective hits. So that's usually the move to go with, but it does lower your defense and special defense, so you have to play around that and kind of plan for the future and make sure you don't make yourself too vulnerable too quickly. Crunch is there for Calyrex Shadow Rider. Looking down on the team a little bit, Pheromosa with Icy Wind can lower Calyrex Shadow Rider's speed before it moves. It's faster than Cali-S. And then after a speed drop, Rayquaza outspeeds Calyrex Shadow, and then Crunch is a one-hit KO. So, playing against Calyrex Shadow, you want to lower its speed, and then get that Crunch KO. Overheat is mostly there for Zacian. It does a big chunk into it. It does not KO most Zacian. You want to get some chip damage onto it beforehand, which Ferramosa, again, is a very good partner for. But it does do a big chunk to it if it hits. And then it's also a great move onto grass types if you don't want to drop your defenses with Dragon Ascent too soon. Second up is Articuno with Competitive and a Citrus Berry, with Protect, Freezing Glare, Tailwind, and Light Screen. So this Articuno is very defensive, 252 HP, and then mostly into special defense and then some into normal defense as well, with Protect, Freezing Glare, Tailwind, and Light Screen. So this is mostly for the Kyogre matchups. Articuno has the ability to survive a Water Spout, and then it can Tailwind, and then the next turn do a Light Screen to really protect the team from Kyogre. Freezing Glare is also great, especially if you get a competitive boost. It's a little bit awkward because Articuno with the competitive could be a good matchup to Incineroar, but because I only have Psychic move on it, it's not a counter to Incineroar. If you're trying to counter Incineroar, Landorus or Pheromosa are definitely the ways to go. But Articuno is a pretty good support. It didn't really get a chance to shine in any of the battles that I showed. It is in a Dream Ball, which I thought was really cool. I spent a lot of time trying to catch one in that. Third up is Landorus with Sheer Force and Life Orb, with Protect, Earth Power, Sludge Bomb, and Grass Knot. So pretty typical Landorus here, with Timid Nature, Max Speed, Max Special Attack. Earth Power, Sludge Bomb, pretty obvious. They're the best 2 moves it has. And then Grass Knot is to help with the Kyogre matchup, as well as Groudon. Fourth up is Ferramosa, which is my personal favorite MVP of the team. It's such a good Pokemon. It's so underused because a lot of people use Regieleki for the same role that it fills. But it has a key advantage over Regieleki, where Regieleki cannot affect ground types, mostly Landorus, where Pheromosa with Icy Wind does the same role of super fast Pokemon with speed control, but it's 4 times effective against Landorus as opposed to being not effective at all. Close combat is insanely good against almost everything except ghosts. Pheromosa's gotten a great attack stat, and then Stab on top of that makes close combat amazing. And then Poison Jab is mostly there for fairies, which can give Rayquaza some troubles. Fifth up is Amoonguss with a Mental Herb and Regenerator, with Protect, Rage Powder, Spore, and Grass Knot. So this Amoonguss is max HP with mostly special defense and some defense, with a Sassy Nature and 0 speed EVs to make it the best Trick Room Amoonguss it can possibly be. Rage Powder, just obvious redirection support. And because Rayquaza is 4 times resistant to grass, you don't really care about it not affecting grass types. Spore is just amazing, 100% accurate sleep move. You can really spam it under Trick Room as long as Tapu Fini isn't involved. And then Grass Knot is just pretty good attack against Kyogre and Groudon. It does great damage because they're so massive and so heavy. And into Kyogre, obviously, actually into both, it's super effective. So it's just pretty good damage. It's actually good damage into a lot of restricteds, but most of them resist it. So it's mostly the Weather Duo that you use it against. Then last up is Incineroar. Same exact Incineroar I used for my Dialga team. Flare Blitz, Darkest Lariat, Fake Out, and Parting Shot. Just really, really solid support Pokemon. Still don't like it, still not a fan of Incineroar, but it, again, ties the team together really, really well. And there's no other Pokemon that kind of has all the roles it can do in one. So this is the team. Like I mentioned last week, I had to overwrite my Ho-Oh team to share this one. So sorry, but the Ho team is no longer shared, but this one's available. And then next week, I'm going to have to get rid of another team again. I've done most of the generations now, at least one restricted from every generation, except Gen 5, 6, and 7. I have a Xerneas team made, and I have a Reshiram team made. Reshiram's probably going to be next week. I made it pretty recently, but it's one of my favorite teams to play with. So look forward to Reshiram next week. Actually, I'll just do this in the outro. So we'll go to the outro now. So, now talking about what's going to happen next week. So next week is going to be the Reshiram team that I just built. I played it a little bit on the ladder tonight, and I had a lot of fun with it. It's a pretty interesting team, I think. Uses some pretty interesting sets. And I really like Reshiram and Zekrom. Personally, I prefer Zekrom, but I'm still working on making a good team with it. So Reshiram's up first, and then I will probably do my Xerneas team, and I still need to make a team for one of the Gen 7 restricteds. So that is going to be my next goal, is making one for them. So if you're interested in any of that, or if you just really like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, because I'm going to be putting out more content like this. One thing that I am planning right now and going to start doing a playthrough is I'm going to be doing a Nuzlocke of Sword and Shield with only Gen 1 Pokemon, which is a lot more restrictive than it sounds. I was going over the encounters available, and it's going to be a lot more restrictive than I thought it would be, so that should be pretty fun. If you're interested in that, make sure you subscribe. That'll be coming out soon. So yeah, thank you again, and we'll go ahead and sign off.